There are many writing techniques that can be taught in a technical manner. In previous videos, linked below, I've shown you how to write in the active voice, how to be concise, how to lend a certain rhythm to your prose, how to implement the old adage, show, don't tell, and I've discussed how using these techniques can make your writing more engaging, immediate, and impactful. But there's a difference between the technical aspects of writing and the heart of it. So, in this video, I'm going to touch on the latter, a crucial component of which is insight. And, as always, I've written in prose a comprehensive example to build upon my discussion. Now, what do I mean by insight? Well, to be insightful is to first grasp and then convey a certain depth of understanding, one which can be arrived at either through personal experience or research. If you, the writer, know how it feels to, let's say, catch a big northern pike, you might provide insight into how it hit your lure and ran with it, how you had to tighten the drag on your reel lest it steal away all your line, how it dove to the bottom of the lake and refused to surface, how your hands blistered because the rod wasn't built to reel in such beasts, how excited you felt when you finally did, and the long, streamlined predator thrashed and splashed, its mottled pattern of green and white scales glinting in the sunlight. Or perhaps you were anxious, seeing the hook was barely in its mouth, and it was near escape. Or maybe you hadn't attached a steel leader to your line, and the pike's needle-like teeth might cut your fine, transparent filament any second. These specific details provide an insight into fishing, details I couldn't have known without having either lived the experience, as is the case here, or having done a fair bit of research. As writers, we can't have insight into every single facet of life, so when our own experience is lacking, our best bet is to extrapolate based on a similar experience we've had. For example, you may not know what it's like to be chased through a cave by a demon with 6 legs and pincers for hands, but maybe your neighbor's dog chased after you once, and you felt frightened, if only for a moment. Or perhaps you've had an encounter with a bully of some sort. You may have never been in a dark cave, but maybe your dad showed you The Exorcist when you were 12, and you were terrified of the dark for 2 weeks, staring at the closet, unable to sleep. Drawing from the experiences you do have, while also seeking to expand your experiential horizons in life, is what allows you to empathize with your characters and write with more honesty and specificity, and thus add depth or insight to your writing. So let's look at an example. You could tell the reader Tim was frustrated. You could also show or imply this by writing, Tim sucked in a deep breath, held it, and pulled at his hair, then smashed his model plane to pieces. But if you want to add depth to your writing, or be insightful, you first have to understand what human struggle led Tim to this behavior, and then convey or describe this struggle with specificity, nuance, and a sort of visceral relatability. Or, in other words, you want to make this conflict real to the reader in a way that they can understand without having any shared experience with the character, save that of being human. And because insight often relates to the theme of a particular narrative, or rather, insight is often what conveys the theme to the reader, let's decide on one to further our example. Let's say our theme is finding meaning in life in the wake of drug addiction, and that Tim is frustrated building this model plane because he feels that this attempt to distract himself from his addiction and maintain his fragile sobriety is in vain. This example's a bit somber, I know, but I suspect that if you're watching this video, you're likely interested in adding depth to some heavy themes of your own, so I thought, why not tackle something with a little weight? So, let's see how I've packaged this in prose. The scent of glue and paint wafted through the room, reminiscent of nothing. This was not a thing Tim had ever done, or, frankly, ever wanted to. He painted the tail fin black, the last touch on his model plane, and reclined on his sofa to watch it dry. There, that was it. A decoration, I guess. He glanced from his creation atop the coffee table to the couch he'd sunk into, and stared at an old burn mark on one cushion. Melted, mottled fabric, the mark of a hot spoon, discarded once his lighter had melted the heroin it had held and his needle had lapped it up. He could have moved it. When the smell and smoke arose, he could have transferred the needle from one hand to the other, picked up the spoon and placed it on the table. A simple act, and yet he'd let it burn. Also, he could inject his bliss a moment sooner, and it'd remain there, glued to the cheap, melted fabric until he'd peeled it off the next day when he'd needed it, as he'd owned no other. The itch crawled beneath Tim's skin. He missed it, more than his dead mother. Nothing would ever be so sweet as that black tar in his veins, that timeless bliss. The craving clawed at him, and he pulled his 1-month chip from his jean pocket, turned it over in his fingers. Sobriety, what a fragile thing. He'd relapse. He didn't have the strength not to. Might as well just give up now, spare myself all this needless suffering. I was enslaved the moment I emptied that first needle in my arm. It's not worth trying, not worth changing, not worth... He ran his nails along his scalp, choked down rapid gulps of air. Would it ever get easier? not building some damn plane, it won't. He brought his fist down on the model he'd spent 8 hours building, smashed it, swept its remains off the coffee table, and buried his face in his palms. Now, with this short, spur-of-the-moment piece, it was my intention to provide insight into Tim's very human struggle, namely, that of addiction. Let me know in the comments how I did. I chose addiction because even if the reader has never been destructively addicted to a hard drug like heroin, just about everyone can understand it to one degree or another, whether it be to food, video games, social media, some naughty corner of the internet, or lesser drugs like coffee. I had to combine both personal experience and knowledge to write this. I've drank alcohol and I've smoked cannabis, so I understand the allure of intoxication through my own experience. And I've practiced austerities such as fasting and celibacy, so I understand, again, through my experience, how difficult it can be to abstain from the pleasures your body craves, how distraction both can and can't help, and how your mind will come up with just all sorts of excuses as to why you should revert back to your old ways. But I've never done heroin. So I had to extrapolate from my own experiences, as well as research a few things about heating drugs on spoons, in order to empathize with Tim and write his struggle. Ultimately, what's important is that we understand through empathy and/or research why our characters are conflicted, why they express themselves in the ways they do, whether this be through actions, thoughts, or emotions, and why the ways in which they express themselves are either helpful or harmful. A story is, in many ways, just a series of conflicts through which characters change. And if you don't provide some degree of insight into these conflicts, then the reader may begin to think that you have nothing of any consequence to say, and stop reading. Anyway, I hope this video offered a little insight into insightfulness, and if it did, then consider tuning in next week for another writing video.